The Brazilian elections are less than 2 weeks away, and President Jair Bolsonaro continues to hint that he will challenge the results if they don't go his way. So, if Bolsonaro does carry out that threat and tries to overthrow the Brazilian election, then what happens next? That's what we will discuss this week on the Brazilian Report. My name is Gustavo Ribeiro. I'm the editor in chief of the Brazilian Report, and I'm glad to be joined this week by Filipe Campante, a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Filipe, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again.
Always a pleasure.
So, Filipe, just for people who are not following the Brazilian election as closely as we both are, I would like just to do a quick recap. So, what we have right now is a scenario of stable polling data. President Jair Bolsonaro has for months polled between the low and the mid 30s, and former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has for almost a year now polled between the low 40s and the mid 40s. And some polling institutes say that he could pull off a first round landslide. So in Brazil, if nobody gets more than 50% of the votes in the first round, then the two best voted ones qualify for a runoff. We may not even have that runoff this time around, depending on if the polling day, the confidence interval goes one way or the other. And one piece of data that it has been key to understanding this race is Bolsonaro's rejection rates, which have been higher than any other president trying to go for re-election, even though the sample size is not that big. He is just the fourth president trying to get a second consecutive term. Why is Bolsonaro's rejection rate so high, in your opinion?
Well, I think it has to do with his governing style, his political style more generally, right? Which is playing to the extremes, right? And that's one side of it, and the other is just his inability or unwillingness to properly govern, right? So his political style is one that, not unlike a lot of his authoritarian populist brethren, is kind of averse to the work of governing itself, right? So I think that shows in how his government has handled some of the crisis situations that have occurred during his term, most notably the COVID pandemic. So that there's that governing aspect of it, but also I think his style, which again is one of sort of stoking the fire of polarization and kind of trying to create a permanent sort of emergency situation, if you will, right? So Bolsonaro is the kind of politician who cannot thrive under normal circumstances, right? He's way too out there to be kind of a viable politician if things are normal. So he has to double down on creating sort of an abnormal situation where he can then position himself as being, the lesser of two evils or something like that, right? If he were in a situation where people were choosing between sort of like normal politicians in a normal environment, he would have no shot, right? Now, because of these two things, his aversion and inability to govern, and his style that always seeks to foster polarization, I think is rather unsurprising that he has the rejection rates that he has. It's just part and parcel of the political creature that he is. And in that sense, I think it's not surprising at all. I think people or those of us who had been kind of always speculating about whether he would moderate or not, I think that was a misguided sort of speculation driven by comparisons with what sort of normal politicians would do in his situation. But he's not a normal politician. He doesn't behave like one. He cannot behave like one because he doesn't have the the tools to do that. And the natural outcome is one where there is strong polarization, and his high rejection rates are just a part of that.
But would you agree that if his main challenger were not Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who has uh, been at the center of every presidential race in democratic times, either on the ballot or with the two front runners either defending or bashing his legacy, maybe Bolsonaro would be the front runner in this election, because for all the problems with Bolsonaro, the Bolsonaro administration that you have listed, the opposition hasn't done that much over the past 4 years. So I remember we at the Brazilian Report, before Lula was made eligible for office again, the base scenario for us was Bolsonaro maybe the favorite to win re-election against an opposition in tatters.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Lula is definitely the strongest available candidate, right? With all the baggage that he has, precisely because he has been at the center of Brazilian politics for such a long time. It is the case that he is sort of the person who commands the strongest support amongst sort of all the politicians that are kind of in the Brazilian scene right now. So that's one thing. Now, I do agree that as a result of that, like in Lula's absence, Bolsonaro, in spite of all that we said before, would have been quite likely in a strong position. First, because, as you mentioned, Brazilian presidents have had a strong incumbency advantage, right? And Bolsonaro has really has really taken down to another level, right? As in, basically overcoming all the guardrails that exist in Brazilian politics to sort of try and prevent the use of what we would call in Brazil the machinery, right, of the government to favor the incumbent president in this case. So he's really doubled down on that. So there's that incumbency advantage, but also I think like his political strategy, if you may call it that, and it might just be kind of an intuitive strategy. We don't need to get into like the workings of Bolsonaro's mind, is one that is effective at that, right? So if you just look back at 2018, he took advantage of a situation where the political establishment was in disarray, and he managed to position himself as the alternative to the left, and particularly the PT, which had a lot of baggage from its time in government and so on. And I think he would have been in a good position to pull off the same trick this time around, right? So he's managed to be, I think, quite effective in completely taking all the oxygen out of the right end of the political spectrum, right? Going from the center right all the way to the far right, which is what he occupies. But he's been very effective precisely at creating that situation where other alternatives, could not emerge on that end of the spectrum, and he would have been in a good position to be again the anti-PT, right? And as we all know, the PT as a party is not as strong electorally as Lula himself is. So I think in Lula's absence, Bolsonaro would have been in a strong position, as you put it, in spite of all that's happened, over the last nearly 4 years.
Yeah, and I mean, he still commands 1/3 of the electorate, so it's quite impressive given the failure that has been his administration in many ways in terms of health policies, environmental policies, the economic crisis that we have endured this past couple of years with the COVID recession. Then we have inflation staying for over 10% for a year. I mean, it's quite impressive, his endurance, given all that. Now, despite this strength that Bolsonaro still has, the polls say he will lose the election, whether on October the 2nd in the first round or on October the 30th, the runoff election. And Bolsonaro, for more than a year, has tried to sow distrust in Brazil's electoral system. He has raised allegations that the system could be rigged. We have an 100% electronic voting system. Now, this system has never faced credible fraud allegations. Bolsonaro himself has already said verbatim that he didn't have evidence of any possible way that the system could be rigged, and still he's trying to instill in his voters the sentiment that the only way he could lose is if the election is stolen from him. And he has, in this past week or so, given mixed signals about how he may react to defeat. So he was talking to evangelical podcasters a few days ago, and he said that if it's not in God's will for him to win a second term, he would retreat from public life. Then this weekend, he was speaking to a TV station from London because he went there to attend Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. And he said that if he is not the one pulling off a first round landslide, so completely against what the polls are saying, then it would mean that, quote, something abnormal happened within the electoral courts, the institutions, the authority that oversee the election. How do you interpret these conflicting statements, this sort of, is he trying to disorientate people who are covering it? Or, I mean, how do you see it?
I don't see them as conflicting statements at all. I think he basically, the way he's framing it is, I will, accept defeat if it is clean and legitimate. I think underlining his statement that people made so much of, right? It's like, oh, now he said that he's going to accept defeat. I think very clearly, I think he was, that caveat was blinking red in the background, right? So I think there's no, double step going on here. I think he's very much, committed, I would say, to the position that he will not accept defeat because any defeat he will interpret as evidence of a rigged election, right? And that is, I think, what's going to happen. So I see no backtracking there. I think
still that was on message.
Exactly. I think he was still on message, but maybe he was trying to pull a trick and wink his way around that, and the famous moderation that people keep hoping for almost from him, but it's not going to happen because I think he has way too much kind of riding on it, a lot more than a normal politician would. And, I think his strategy very clearly is to sow doubt, to contest any loss. And he's going to try to get, bargaining power from the chaotic situation that I think he intends to fire up, basically, upon losing the election. So I think he's been very consistent in that, and I definitely expect him. I would be surprised if he just says, "Yeah, I lost. That's it. Going home," and shows up on January 1st to embrace Lula as his successor. I think that would be extremely surprising, I would say.
Now, I want to expand on that, but just before that, I just want to ask something about the people who are watching this on YouTube. Please subscribe to our channel, or even better, subscribe to the Brazilian Report. We are a subscription-based news outlet. We are completely independent, and everything we do is funded by the money that comes from our subscribers. And if you are already subscribed, then you can support us on Buy Me a Coffee. Is a sort of membership program where you can get exclusive content, newsletters, behind the scenes content. You will see how we produce the content, the journalism we do. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report, and you have different subscription tiers, or you can support us from time to time whenever you can and you want. Now, Filipe, to expand about this, you're saying that you would be extremely surprised if Bolsonaro gracefully accepts defeat if the polls are confirmed. Now, we at the Brazilian Report, we published back in March of last year about the risks that some political brokers in Brasilia see that Bolsonaro could try to, quote unquote, barricade himself in office even if he loses. Now, you recently raised on Twitter an interesting question, and it's why I wanted to invite you to talk to us now, that maybe Bolsonaro could literally, physically try to do that, stay in the presidential palace, even if after his term expires, because he would not accept defeat, claiming that the election was stolen. Now, what happens if it comes to it? I mean, who is going to evict the president when his housing contract, so to speak, comes to term?
Yeah, I mean, that was precisely the question that I was raising, because I haven't seen a lot of, at least, open discussion about that, and I think that's something that the so-called institutions in Brazil, right, the political establishment in Congress, in Supreme Court, and sort of all the key political players in Brazil should be, and I hope they are, planning for. Right now, my concern is that people might still, at this point, I think against all evidence of what Bolsonaro is capable of, people might still be, he's not going to do that, will he? Like, that's impossible, because like he's not going to have support for that. And that, I think, is a misconception, because once something like that is underway, which it is, I mean, he is clearly setting the stage for that. It's not just a matter of supporting or not supporting. It's a matter of stopping it. Mm-hmm. So that was a question that I was raised. So, like, who is going to go there and physically get him out if he just refuses to go?
Especially because, if I may interrupt you, when and if a seditious movement is launched, like at full scale, you cannot stop it with statements of condemnation, as we have seen, which has been the only way that the political establishment has reacted to Bolsonaro so far.
Exactly. So that is precisely the gist of my question, right? Which is, it's no longer enough at that point to say, oh, we're horrified, we don't support this, right? Someone actually has to do something. And that's where I think the risks really lie, right? Because it seems to me up to this point that nobody wants to be in charge of doing something like that, right? Mm-hmm. To what extent can we trust, let's say, the security forces to do something like that? I've heard, and sort of in this Twitter dialogue, oh, people have been talking about the federal police. Well, that's fair enough. I'm sure some people in the federal police would love to, like, kick him out and drag him to jail, but some others wouldn't, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of what he's done over the last few years is to really try to kind of increase his support in these institutions. So will the military do that, right? Because this is going to create fission in the military, and I think one thing that the military abhors above pretty much all else is internal division, right? Mm-hmm. So will the so-called legalistic members of the armed forces, right, the ones that are out there giving quotes to journalists, always in the background, right, about the armed forces not embarking on an adventure or whatever they say, will they actually send troops to get him out? And what if other troops maybe don't want that to happen? I think that's where a lot of bad scenarios can arise, precisely because it's not clear who will be in charge and how this would be in practice executed, right? So I think that's where the risks lie. Now, at some point, if he loses the election, he will leave, right? I see very a very small, negligible risk that Bolsonaro would lose the election and manage to stay in power himself. Mm-hmm. I think He just doesn't have the support for that. But in the meantime, there could be a lot of chaos as a result of that attempt, right? And a lot of weird solutions, I think, will be or could well be, tried, or at least trial balloons would start going up in the air there in ways that might actually really subvert the regular democratic process, right? So I think,
like what?
I would say, at some point, some people say, look, we need to, there's a lot of polarization, and we need to come up with a consensual solution. And I'm sure, Gilmar Mendes and Arthur Lira are going to be involved in drawing some solution there, where we say, oh, we need to have, some sort of semi-presidentialism, or I mean, I don't know what the specific scenario,
which is the silver bullet, right? Every time we have
exactly,
a political
right?
crisis
So
in Brazil,
there is history of that. Exactly, right? Like if you go all the way back to 1961, right? Like we're not in 1961 anymore, but where like a parliamentary system was introduced in order to get out of a stalemate where the military was against the vice president, who was supposed to replace the president that had resigned. Anyway, I think that type of conversation could very well emerge at that point. So I think all the institutional players, Lula first and foremost, should be mapping out what happens at that point, and I truly hope they are mapping that out, because I think it's a really live possibility.
Now, you talking about the military, and one question that I have is, I've seen two interpretations about what the military is doing right now, because, like you said, they are giving all these quotes about defending democracy, always off the record. On the record, they are actually catering to Bolsonaro's whims about challenging the security of voting machines. The army, which has absolutely no constitution responsibility over elections, is trying to present itself as a sort of guarantor of election security. Now, the two interpretations that I hear, one is, okay, yes, they would go with Bolsonaro and cross the Rubicon with him, or the other one, which me personally, I agree more, which is they want to stay in that ambiguous region in order to have everyone on their heels and protect themselves, their privileges, from being attacked by anyone else in the political establishment, because they're always showing everyone that they have the coup card on their deck. So don't try to tamper with our incredible pension system, healthcare system, big salaries, because it would have consequences in terms of the well-functioning of democracy. Do you find a third interpretation, or do you agree with one of these two?
I think your second interpretation, right, where they're trying to keep the situation ambiguous and sort of highlight the threat at some level, but without kind of ever sort of speaking openly about it, right? I think that's very much true, and in the interest of enhancing their bargaining power, right? I think that's very much what they're trying to do. If I may use some jargon here, it's time for some game theory, as the kids would say. In sort of game theory jargon, we would say they want to keep that threat off the equilibrium path, right? Which means that's a situation that will not emerge, but could emerge under some circumstances. And everybody knows that it could emerge. And the fact that everybody knows means that people respond accordingly. So it affects the way people behave without having to become reality, if you will. So that's how they want it, and that's how they've been playing it, right? Which I think is profoundly toxic for Brazilian democracy, right? I think Brazilian democracy already is under military tutelage, right? Precisely because that card is there in a way that, until not so long ago, we thought that that card had been taken out of the game, right? It's back. Everybody knows it. People behave accordingly, right? You hear all the time about all the key political players talking to the military and having meetings with the military and trying to gauge what they think and trying to keep them, at ease and whatever. That's a democracy that is not healthy, right? So that's
And how do
number
we
one.
change that? Because we see that not only in Brazil, but elsewhere in Latin America. Remember when
Absolutely.
we had protests in Chile? Piñera, when he addressed the nation, he had generals.
Exactly. So I think, the military they've come out of the box, and it's going to be very hard to put them back in. Now, what I would say, though, for the near future, I think that conversation is a very hard one that Brazil and other parts of Latin America, for sure, are going to spend many years having to deal with that, right? But in the near future, I think the problem is you may want to keep that card, in your deck without playing it, right? You may want to keep that threat off the equilibrium path. But stuff happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And miscalculations could happen, particularly if Bolsonaro pushes the situation to a breaking point. So I think people kind of underestimate the risk of a situation arising where no one would actually want to have X happen, but people kind of stumble their way into X, right? I'm always reminded of how some historians have described the lead up to World War I, right?
Yeah,
where it's like, no European countries. Exactly, right? It's like nobody wanted war, but it's like, like you want to threat, you want to be able to threaten, you can't look weak and whatnot and so on. So you might stumble your way into a situation that ex ante nobody wanted. So I think people keep saying, oh, but nobody wants that. And I think the military don't actually want that.
And especially because if you're holding that Joker card, to stay in our analogy, once push comes to shove, if you don't use it, then you lose it, right?
Yeah. So I think they would like to keep it right without having to play it. But I think precisely, and sometimes I think people maybe underestimate that Bolsonaro really is a wild card, I think, in that sense. So it's like the idea that, he won't do that. Would he? Like, he very well might. Chances are that he will. And then you're in a situation where, calculations become hard. And I think miscalculations can emerge. And then we can end up in situations that nobody would really want to get in, right? So I think people keep talking about how, it's not going to happen because nobody wants it to happen. But sometimes stuff happens that nobody would have wanted to happen, if you see what I mean. And I think that is the risk. That is the risk, like in the short term, by which I mean the next couple of months, with the election and the aftermath of the election, that things just get out of control, even though nobody would have preferred them to go out of control. But, the risk exists. I think it's not, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but I think it could happen. And people should be, considering that possibility very, very, strongly.
And before I let you go, one last question that I want to ask you is, we have been talking for months about the possibility of a January 6th scenario in Brazil. Do you think that could happen during election day, after election day, or maybe, and this is what me personally I think would be more probable, not one January the 6th event, but violence spreading out occasionally across multiple weeks, because we have 2 months between the runoff and inauguration day. So not necessarily one event that would be catastrophic, but multiple small-scale events with charged political violence.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's going to be a very, very long 2 months. I think that is sure by now. But I think people need to, I think there's a risk of a failure of imagination, which I think happened already in 2018, when people kind of couldn't conceive of Bolsonaro winning pretty much right until the point where he was, set to win, right? And people keep expecting things to, I think, play out in ways that we have seen before, even when it comes to January 6th, right? It's like, oh, will there be an invasion of Congress? I don't think it's going to play out exactly like that, because, the institutional differences are too great in that sense, right? It's not as if Congress is going to have a role in
we don't have a
certifying exactly. There's no electoral college meeting or what have you, right? So it's going to be
Brazil
different.
Is really for
Yeah, there's that. I have done a lot of work on sort of the role of having capital cities that are isolated, and they offer some sort of insulation against this type of thing. So it's not going to take place in exactly the same way, but I think it could well take place as kind of scattered violence leading to rising tension, maybe something like Bolsonaro just refusing to leave, let's say, the Planalto or Alvorada Palace, right? And then creating like a situation around that. So I think January 6th, Brazilian version, will be different, and we shouldn't be just kind of trying to prevent or trying to tell ourselves that everything is fine because something exactly like January 6th will not happen because this and the other, right? I think there could very well be sort of this widespread, let's say, maybe low-level violence, but just tension and scattered turmoil, if you will, but maybe also kind of some big event that might be related to something like Bolsonaro refusing to leave, or whatever, some threats to the safety of Supreme Court justices, and who knows? But I think we should definitely not constrain our imagination regarding what's possible, because things are gonna most likely things are gonna happen in ways that are not exactly like what's happened before, because that's how things work. If they were exactly the same, then it would be easy to prevent, and then it wouldn't happen. But I think we should be prepared for something, for a January 6th type event that is not quite a January 6th type event. It's just it's just the vibes,
Filipe, thank you very much, and we'll keep in touch, because, like you said, we're going to have very eventful few months from now until the inauguration day of the next president, where it be a second Bolsonaro term, or Lula, on January the 1st. Filipe Campante, professor at Johns Hopkins University, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, always a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch about all of that.
And for people watching this broadcast, just heads up, go to Brazilian.report, and we have a special election report where we mapped the risks of several power brokers, from police forces to regional electoral courts, engaging or not with a possible power grab attempt by President Bolsonaro. You can buy our report on Brazilian.report/subscribe. Filipe, once again, thank you very much. Have a great week, and we'll keep in touch in 2 weeks, election day in Brazil.
Thanks a lot, and let's see what happens.
I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about our new exclusive report on the 2022 Brazilian elections, a watershed moment for Brazilian democracy. In less than a month, Brazilians will head to the polls in what is gearing up to be the most decisive election in the country's recent history. Everything you need to know to be well positioned in this crucial moment. Our 31-page report is filled with in-depth analysis that will bring you up to date on crucial topics such as the main issues facing the economy, Bolsonaro's re-election strategy, threats to Brazilian democracy, the importance of congressional elections, and a detailed overview of governor races in key Brazilian states. So don't hang around any longer, become an insider with the Brazilian Report. Go to brazilian.report/subscribe and use the coupon code September22 for a 20% discount on our exclusive report.